Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of this amazing weekly series called Centaur Stage, where every Thursday afternoon, myself and some incredible guests come on LinkedIn Live to discuss something that we're obsessing about and share insights and opinions and perspectives about the way we work and the way that we learn. Before we start, just a reminder, as always, please do post your comments and your questions. Myself and Tala, who's in the background producing this show for us, are going to be on the lookout for those so that we can make sure James, gives us a piece of his mind. Today, we're hosting a Discuss segment with James Piecowye. I'll introduce you real quick. James is a 20-year-old. Yeah, he's also a 20-year-old. He's a 20-year veteran. He's a 20-year veteran of Zaid University's College of Communication and Media Sciences, where he is an associate professor. He is also a prolific podcaster on Podaholics and his own channel, the Jamescast, where I was invited to be a guest a few months back for an episode about employee engagement. In his spare time, James works with a wonderful team of volunteers for Creative Mornings in Dubai to imagine and deliver extraordinary monthly breakfast lectures. And the 61st edition is in February. James is a Canadian born in North Bay, Ontario, and he earned his PhD in communication from the University of Montreal. And he believes that absolutely everything we do has educational value and encourages others to spread their interests far and wide. And we'll be kind of deep diving into that in a bit. James, thanks for joining us. I always love your vibrant shirts. I think it's definitely part of your brand. And so I tried to find something today to vibrate at the same energy level as you.
Oh, thank you very much. You do look awesome. That's great. Yeah, shirts are really important. And I actually did a talk at TED Active several years ago titled "Every Story Has a Shirt, Every Shirt Has a Story." And it was all about shirts like this. So it's kind of cool.
That's brilliant. I remember
it's my brand in my life now, these shirts, by the way.
Definitely. I remember the first time I met you, you also had a mask that was like the same pattern as your shirt. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Thanks so much for joining us. So as we were preparing for this episode, James told me that he was really passionate about broad knowledge. And I was elated because if any of you know what my career path looks like, you know that I'm a massive generalist. And I often like to talk about how generalists will triumph in a specialized world. We named this episode after a book that I'm a big fan of called Range, written by David Epstein, not that Epstein, not the bad guy. It's an unfortunate name, but here we go. And in this book, Epstein argues that specialization is useful for what he calls kind problems. So he says, if you're a specialist, then you will triumph in environments that are closed, predictable environments, like a chess game or playing golf or playing music. That's where that 10,000 hour story can be really useful. On the other hand, the modern world, and God knows we've gotten proof of that this year, he calls it to be a world that is characterized by wicked problems, problems where the rules of the games and the players change all the time. And that requires us to deal with new situations where past experience doesn't necessarily help us. And of course, pandemic has been a brilliant example of that. So today, James and I are going to explore the value of having range in our knowledge and skills and whether generalists can truly help shape the future of work and the future of the world. And see what we think about that. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this all week.
I've been really excited to speak to you again. I had such a great time in our last sesh, and we promised each other that we'd have another conversation about it. So here we go. But this time, I get to control the room rather than you.
Yeah, that is always a really daunting thing because I'm used to being in control and steering and ducking and diving the conversation. And in this process, you have all the control, and I just have to answer the questions. It's daunting. It's really daunting.
Let's see if I can land us then. So in his book, Epstein says that broad knowledge is exactly what this rapidly changing wicked world requires because it allows us to connect new ideas and work across contexts. He gives a lot of examples to demonstrate that. One of them that always stuck with me is that, I hope I don't butcher this one, but essentially NASA had been trying to figure out how to orient the solar panels in one of their stations to kind of maximize the energy saving for that station. And NASA, very smart NASA scientists had spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out the best way to do that, and they still weren't very comfortable with it. So they went with crowdsourcing. And what's really fascinating about what he describes is that, people of all sorts of backgrounds and trades kind of submitted their own suggestions. Now, here's the trick. Every single suggestion by a non-NASA scientist, the real deal. And so I ask you, James, tell me, what are your thoughts on this, and how do you teach your students to develop their own range?
So you know what, I think it's spot on what Epstein's talking about, because the things that we're trying to deal with, the things that are confronting us on a daily basis, are not really focused. And the problem is, so I'm going to go to the problem first and then go back to why this is important. The problem is our education systems go from being really broad. So you think of your primary school and your kindergartens, and then you start moving up and you're in middle school. And up to about that point, it's pretty broad range stuff. And there's, you're teaching English and math and science, and they're all kind of connecting together, whether it's on purpose or accidentally, because the teachers tend to, especially in your primary schools, are all doing the same thing. So the possibility to see some interrelation, and sometimes we might call that, your IB programs, your experiential learning, and those kind of things, right? And it actually works pretty well. The problem is, once you start getting into high school, and then definitely once you get into university, you start going down these big giant silos. And so we're so enculturated into, well, if I'm doing management, I'm in a business school. And if I'm doing art, I'm in an art school. And if I'm doing communication, I'm in a communication school. Maybe I'm in an English school as an English language. And if you're doing that stuff, you don't mix with the other people until you come out with your very narrow degree that has focused you on only reading and thinking about certain things in your professional career. And so you go from being very creative in how you think about things to very, no, you only read this stuff to know it. And so I think we are currently doing ourselves a big disservice, because we're teaching like this. And some teachers, and I won't say I'm one of them, but I like to think that I'm in the crowd, is trying to sort of broaden out what we do by creating environments where you need to bring together a whole bunch of things to make what you're teaching work. So whether that be trying to get people to write things in a certain way that requires them to do it differently than you might be expected to in a common term paper, or present things, why not present your work as a poem instead? Where's the soundtrack that's going to go behind it? Those kind of things. And people look at it and you go, what are you talking about? And I say, well, can't you give me the introduction as a poem? And they're like, why would I do that? I said, well, why wouldn't you do that? And it's, it's kind of force feeding change. But the reality is, as we start looking at these problems, and as you say, like, crowdsourcing and being able to ask other people what they think, and being able to respect people who are outside of your domain of knowledge, that's really hard, because the doctor knows best, or the auto mechanic knows best, or the engineer knows best. And what can I know about engineering, or what can I know about being an auto mechanic, or what can I know about being a medical doctor? Well, when we start to realize that we all have these intrinsic relationships that work together, and we all bring pieces of the same knowledge with slightly different bends to it, as soon as you start realizing that and trusting, I think the big thing is trust, actually, because I think we kind of do it, but we don't trust the other people so much. As soon as you trust that, hey, that guy's or that gal's idea is really good, and there's something there, and then you start to reimagine a little bit what you're doing, connecting the two together becomes a much better possibility. And you actually arrive at things that you wouldn't normally arrive at.
Yeah.
And I think that's intrinsic to where we're going. And I think there's a small group of people who actually do that well. And the small group of people who tend to do that well are the people who have failed a lot at stuff, who have given up on studying things and moved into other areas because it just wasn't their thing. And suddenly they take with them one section of knowledge and they marry it to something else. And sometimes I think of myself like that, actually, because I studied communication, but that's not what I want. That's not my original thing that I studied. So I ended up with a communication degree from the University of Montreal, and I studied under Marc Rabois. Amazing stuff. The lessons this guy taught me were spectacular. We were never friends, but we got along really well. And you do some work with people for so many years. We were never friends. I'm scared of the guy to this day. Like he's terrifying, amazing. But I ended up with a communication degree, but I started with a political economy degree, and I worked on a PhD and actually did my comprehensive exams in political economy, not in communication. But that political economy stuff was all based around communication ideas. Then I realized, with the help of the school, that, I was in the wrong place. Yeah. I left the political economy degree, went and then took all the courses in a communication degree, which I'd never taken before. So suddenly I'm learning all this communication stuff, but I'm marrying the communication to political economy, and suddenly a whole new world opens up. And I'm going,
yeah, I mean, I get that. That's just mind-blowing. I mean, I have a very similar story myself. As you know, like I studied architecture, then I went into technology, then I became a chief marketing officer, then I was the head of the Dubai Opera. And I think that the ability to kind of connect dots between when I was an architect and then turning into tech and saying, well, tech is kind of like designing virtual spaces, and what can I take from my architecture degree that I can throw into this that can help me structure things or collaborate better or bring in more diverse thinking is something that, I mean, I have to believe in it because I'm like a poster child of that. But I do feel like that's echoed by a lot of people. And I often feel when I describe my career path to some people who have just met me, I'm like, listen, I'm a really great generalist, whatever. And then at the end of it, in fact, it happened just this morning with somebody. She said to me, oh, that's such a relief, because I went through the same kind of path. And I always feel bad telling people, because in this world, we kind of over reward specialization. Yeah.
See, the whole term generalist kills me, because I never think of it as being a generalist, just as someone who's got a lot of different interests. And so I never put that label on things. And when I listen to what you're talking about, and I haven't met the person that you were talking about with having all these interests today, but it's what I sense the two of you have got in common. And this is where this whole idea of education and having these broad knowledges becomes important, is what you've done, Marilyn, is you gave yourself permission to think in terms of connecting these ideas. And yes, you've got all these broad interests, but they've all really molded around the core ideas. And you've just given yourself permission to realize, hey, this is the way I am. This is what I'm doing. I'm proud of it, and it works. And I think as soon as people give themselves that permission, because we don't, we say, oh, I failed at this, or I failed. I mean, you could have easily said, oh, I failed at this, and then I went this, and I'm a failure. And there's a whole bunch of people who do that instead of giving themselves permission to say, hey, you know what? I've got something that others don't have. And as soon as you do that, it opens up a whole new realm of interrelationship, and the textures of those ideas become far more interesting to both you and those people that you're interacting with.
Yeah. And on the topic of that interconnection, earlier you were talking about, like, how about you do it as a poem? I was watching a really cute Netflix series actually this weekend called Never Have I Ever. I don't know if you've seen it, but in it, the professor, he's a history professor, and he's trying to teach these American kids about the Holocaust. And then he tries to get them to, like, instead of studying some boring history text, he says, like, why don't you come up with an app idea that if this had happened now could have helped people? And the kids are all like, oh my God, why do we have to do this? Why can't we just study? I know that you're like incredibly good at producing your show, because I remember when we talked about, your teaching style, you're like, well, I need to put up like a TEDx talk every time I'm in front of these students. Yeah. Tell me how, like, this new world has opened up maybe new opportunities for how you teach and what you've experimented with over the last few months.
You know what it's done is it's suddenly made the idea of having a produced class in education okay. And it is no longer the oddity when a student walks into a classroom and you've got some video stuff going and you maybe got a soundscape playing, and then you stop in the middle of it and you say, get out your phones. I want you to now I want you to just hold it up, and I want you to do a 40-second beat. Suddenly, all of that stuff that you would do in a classroom that was kind of weird, now that's all the norm because it's entirely technologically driven. And I think it's incredible, right down to the idea that everything now is recorded, and not just recorded because someone's, sitting there with their phone and grabbing a little bit of a segment of what you're doing, or they put their recorder down. You're recording the entire bit of content that you've produced, and in many cases giving it to your students to use. And I just think it's I think we're right at we're really at the cusp of taking education from this formal, boxed, this is the way it's done. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who are fighting and screaming right now because they don't want it to stay like this. But when I'm thinking of the stuff that you see on YouTube, I'm thinking of the way Khan Academy does stuff, and Skillshare, and the list goes on, right? And suddenly that type of learning, why can't that be the way that we go to school? And now I can add that extra value to when I'm teaching, media law and ethics. I mean, come on, there's nothing drier than media law and ethics. But I can now add that extra content to it to send out, as we might say, that asynchronous part and say, okay, I want you to go look at this case study. I want you to go look at this and go look at that. And then when we get together, we're going to play with how you're imagining this all coming together. And I don't just want you to tell me, okay, this is what I saw. I want you to create your own example and use some of the technology that you've got available to you. And so I think we have a lot of options and ideas. Some of it takes us back to those primary schools, because those primary school teachers, they're really good at it. They have a lot of resources that they've used for worksheets and online things and apps, and they're really good at this. And in a sense, I find me as this university professor, this lecturer, is getting pulled into that realm of making, I've got my core lecture, I've got my core stuff, but the way we connect to it is now really different. And how we express that connection, how we demonstrate our cognition of where it's going, becomes really different, in that it's more entertainment driven, it's more information driven, it's more focused on that presentation, that process driven. So not just stand up, I'm going to do a presentation, but now you've suddenly got the ability to do a lot more with it. And all of this is happening at the same time. So I think it's really an opportunity. But it's the challenge is, it's, instead of happening over 10 years, it's happened over 10 months. And that is frightening and scary at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, actually, on this topic, of course, schools and universities and so many other industries have had to kind of reimagine the way that they work and the way that they deliver value to everybody. And I wanted to also get your thoughts on the fact that we are now in an environment where, just to survive, right? In every conversation I have, especially today, now that kind of everybody's settled into the fact that this isn't an acute crisis that's going to be over. Instead, people kind of now point to, here's how we re-engineered our business, and here's how we relearned how to do things, and this is how we developed, new skill set. This morning, I was reading the letter that Jeff Bezos wrote to his employees, as he is handing over. Everybody says as Jeff steps down, and I'm like, he ain't stepping down. This is not a step down. Right? He's handing over the reins to somebody that's been in the company for so long. And I hate that word. So as he passes on the baton, let's put it that way. And he wrote something really that I read, and I said, I'm going to want to talk about this with James. He said, we are leaders in areas as varied as machine learning and logistics. And if an Amazonian's idea requires yet another new institutional skill, we're flexible enough and patient enough to learn it. And I thought, it is true. And Cosmic Centers, we always say we're about the future of work and learning. And I know that traditionally, it's like you learn for 18 years, whatever, however long, or 25, and then you work. And I feel like those two worlds are truly merging more and more together. And organizations have to become also incredibly good at teaching people or helping them learn new skills. I found it amazing that the CEO of one of the best companies in the world, in a short, 6-7 paragraph letter, would bring that up. And what do you think are some lessons that you can kind of help organizations from the way that you teach and how you see people learning, so that they can teach their employees the new skills they need to just survive, and also to use the new world as an opportunity to grow.
I think, that for all of the negative things in the pandemic that we look at, and unfortunately our news and the way our information entertainment media works, it only focuses on this negative stuff, and it keeps, perpetuating it. I think we're well informed to go and read a little Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message, and start thinking about how we're getting the information in that, and a little bit of Neil Postman. If an older book, but so important, the title, go look it up, and it's in plain, easy to read language. Entertaining Ourselves to Death is what he wrote about. And as soon as you take a little bit of McLuhan, a little bit of Postman, put it together, you kind of go, we're doomed, because we're getting all of this bad information. Now, there's a golden side to this pandemic. One, we're at home more. And two, it's forcing us to think more about the larger scale of things we do. And in some cases, we do things in scale that now we need to be thinking a little bit smaller. And ultimately, I find we need to be thinking about us a lot more, and about how things are interconnected. So our home life, our work life, and that things, and how, so those become one, but then how we're actually doing things, because I'm certain there are people watching right now who are going to go, 12 months ago, if I'd said to my boss, I want to work from home, they would have said, not a chance. Now, a whole bunch of people working from home. Yes, people are going back to the office, and there's a whole bunch of people going back to the office who are going, why am I in the office? I was way more productive at home, and I maybe come to the office once a week and have that meeting, but I can make things work. And what we start to realize is, so what are the skills I really need? And what I've come to realize is that there are a number of hard skills we need, but there are a number of soft skills we also need that many organizations were undervaluing. So, thinking about how do we actually mentor people, a soft skill. And organizations don't talk a lot about that, but that's a huge skill that we need, especially now that we're not around each other. And a mentor becomes a really important thing to have. And organizations are, okay, you're going to mentor someone. It's like, I don't know anything about mentoring. So suddenly, well, you know what? You can go and take that course, and we're going, here's where you can go do it, or there's an online version. We want you to invest the 20 hours in getting some mentoring qualifications so that you can actually do it better. Or starting to think about mental health that people have, and started saying, so what's the mental health issue that you've really got? Lack of connection, lack of, disconnecting from the job. What are some of those things? So what do we actually need to do as organization-wise is, we start to realize in this context how poorly organizations actually communicate within them. And so in, organizational communication, we talk about it a lot, and organizations say, oh yeah, I do a great job of telling people what we're doing, and we do a great job of this. But how well do you actually talk to your employees when they're sitting around? Yeah, you send them emails, but do you really talk to them? Like, do you have a segment in the organization? And often we think of it as HR, but HR, look, I know there's HR people who are watching, and I don't want to throw water on HR, but honestly, HR is not good at talking to employees. There's often a very adversarial aspect, and there are a few organizations that do a really good job, Herman Miller being one of them. Look, this is an opportunity for us to realize, how do we talk better as an organization? But I think the one for me that becomes really, really important, and I think this is flying right over the heads of so many people in the pandemic situation, is, and this goes right back to this range idea, is what are all the things I could be learning and doing that now I suddenly have the opportunity to do that don't necessarily seem like they connect to my job, yet they totally connect to my job. So an example would be cooking. Now, why wouldn't I send my employees or sign them up for some cooking courses? And you might be saying, people are thinking, cooking, how does that relate to accounting? So the first thing is, you got to feed people, and people have to eat well, and they need to eat balanced food, and they need to eat things that aren't just pulled out of boxes because there's all sorts of preservatives in them. So, you head over to Jamie Oliver. If you can cook 7 great meals and duck and dive, you win. So why aren't we teaching people how to cook? And so on the first thing, it's like, well, but cooking, anyone I know who is trained in cooking is a huge time management tool.
Yes.
So you need to manage time.
Amen.
You need to make choices. And often you have to make substitutional choices on the way things go together. Cooking involves following a plan through and thinking about the course of action and the implications of everything you're going to do. So suddenly, cooking is a micro picture of every organization as you're putting things together. And cooking involves sticking to it through the end. But with cooking, like everything, you have a set deadline. So I start cooking, 20 minutes, cook it, take it out of the oven, it's done. And this is where our workplaces they go so wrong, because what are they doing? And is they say, okay, we're going to have a project. Well, when's the project going to end? Well, when it's done. Well, no. When I make a cake, it's done in 20 minutes. So are we talking, or 20 minutes? 20 minutes to make it, an hour to cook in the oven, I'm done. So when I do this project, why don't we start bringing in some of these ideas from other things that we're doing and realizing, okay, so if you want a project to really work in your office, say, okay, we're gonna work on this project. You 4 people are gonna do it, and you're gonna be done in a month's time. Right. And that's our window. And so suddenly, if you're sending people to do things actually that they need to do anyway, and that they're going to see some value in, because I learned how to cook at work, and you're applying it all to work anyway because all the pieces go to it. It's like a win-win-win. And then your employees kind of go, I work in the best place in the world because they're so forward thinking and they're so concerned about me. Yeah. And it's like range, right? And
James, I love this example because of those of you who know me on Instagram, I'm called Permanent Hunger. Food has been like a big thing for me my whole life. But you reminded me of something I had forgotten, which is when I first started being an adult and having people over. Of course, I'm Lebanese, so you never just do one thing, right? You have to do one chicken dish and one fish dish, and maybe somebody's vegetarian, so you actually have to cook quite a few things. And if you do want to enjoy other people's company, you want all of these things to end at the same time. You want them to be ready simultaneously. And I still have it somewhere in one of my cookbooks, but I used to make Gantt charts and say I need to start the salad 15 minutes before the end, and I need to put this in the oven 2 hours so that everything would work towards the same thing. But also now, something that Tala and I do, because we work together from each other's homes, once a week. And we cook together. And not only do we feel like, a friend of mine commented once, she's like, you guys nurture each other. To your point, you're feeding yourself something you care about, your full self as a human being. But also it has taught us teamwork. Because somebody has to lead, someone has to chop, someone has, and different people have to check in, I just finished doing this. What do you want me to do next? And it's an incredible kind of range of we use cooking to learn how to work well together as a team. And I love that example. I could talk about it for days, but it's just such a brilliant.
Like you said, it gets you talking then. And then inevitably when you're working together and you tell you start talking, I remember this. And suddenly you're not talking about the bad news that's going on. You're just having fun. You're being people. And I think that's the other big side of our work world is anyone who works in an organization knows you get cliques. You get people who don't really talk together. They don't know each other because the environment's not there to do it. So by building on everything that we're doing through, as you're saying, through range, suddenly it's win-win-win. And I don't know the downside. I mean, truly, I can't think of one.
That's brilliant. I love this conversation. I'm going to ask you our last question of the day. Can you believe almost 30 minutes have gone by? I could talk to you for another hour, to be honest. But I am the timekeeper, so I must do this. And I'll ask you my last question. So we ask this to all of our guests. And so, James, I want you to complete a sentence, and then I want you to explain why you chose that word. The future of learning is ...
Exciting. I think exciting. I think we are sitting right now at this enormous opportunity, and it's ours to lose because never before have we had such a reset. And the challenge with the opportunity is our education, while it's shifting. And while we've had glimmers of that, and again, I keep talking, LinkedIn has education, Skillshare, and things on YouTube, but we've been so structured into this brick and mortar education system that are attached around buildings, where suddenly we've been shown that we don't need the buildings anymore. Sure, we need some some training in how to do these things a little bit differently. We need better Wi-Fi. We need better broadband. We need better computers and different screen setup. Sure, there's all these physical things, but we have this exciting opportunity to reinvent education for the real world for today that is going to take us into this innovative environment that is being forced upon us. And I just think it's absolutely, I just think, wow, I mean, this is mine to lose. And I am so scared of losing it. I don't want to see, it's like the old man thing now, right? Is I don't want to wake up 20 years from now and my kids go, Dad, why didn't you take advantage of the opportunity you had? So I was like, yeah, you're right. We got to do it now. And the best part is there are people who are terrified and they're fighting tooth and nail to sustain what they're comfortable with. And I think, you know what? Let's get everyone out of their comfort zone. Hold on. We're out of our comfort zone. So now let's stay out of the comfort zone. It's not like we have to get them out of the comfort zone. We're not in a comfort zone. So what have you got to lose? Like nothing. So experiment. Try it. Are you meeting the goals? Yeah. Try doing it in other ways. As long as you get to where you're going, who cares how you get there? So let's experiment with it. Maybe something's going to work. Keep doing it. If something doesn't work, stop doing it. What have we learned from the pandemic? Things change weekly. Okay, I'm willing to do that. And you know what? All I ask is let's have some fun along the ride and let's assess it after and maybe write about it. But you know what? I kind of go from the standpoint of, is it going to keep me enthused and excited to learn and be engaged with that? And if I feel excited to be engaged with the content and stuff that I'm doing, how's someone not going to be excited with me? I don't think they can't be. So, and if they're not excited and someone says, sir, this is really boring stuff. Okay, we'll change it.
Yeah. I love that. The audience is really responding to what you just said. Someone said, I think tackling any job crisis, problem, or opportunity with the freedom of spirit allows us to be creative in finding solutions and invent new things. And we're getting comments about, how positive. And even I'm like, damn, it's a shame it's Thursday because there's a weekend. I wish it was Sunday morning because I want to get to work, Thanks so much for that energy.
I hope the folks, and the biggest challenge to this is not the people who are down below. If you're a teacher and you're on the ground level working with the clients, the students, those folks don't have the issue. The problem is the people a little bit higher up who are responding to shareholders or ministries and others. They've got to convince them and the folks who kind of man the ship that, hey, you know what? We can change the deck chairs quite a bit. In fact, we can change the configuration of the decks. And that's the challenge. But you know what? I think if they do a Bezos, right? Enable the people you're working with, enable them, but legitimately enable them. And I even take it another step further. It's like, you know what? If I've got colleagues who are not interested in change, don't. But enable me to create that change. And if there are students and there are people who are learning who want to go down this other path that enables them to have a little bit more flexibility and will put them in a really great position when they tackle things in this ever-changing technologically driven world that has technology and real world things that are, like Post-it notes that you got to deal with. If you can marry that, because sometimes technology is not electronic, it's physical. If you can marry that, great. Those few who don't want to go down the path, well, look, you go back to the old way. It's never going to last anyway. And then once they cycle out of the system, we'll all move towards a different thing. I mean, it's that simple.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, James. And thanks for your energy and for being such a wonderful guest. Thanks to all our attendees and the people commenting. I think you've got everybody very excited today. We'll be, of course, reposting the video. You'll always be able to rewatch it on the LinkedIn profile, and we'll put it on YouTube and our website. Those of you who don't follow Cosmic Centaurs already, please do follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Tala and I work very hard, and the rest of the team, to post some pretty cool content for you guys. Do subscribe to our newsletter too, and then join in next Thursday, February 11th, at 2:30 p.m. Dubai time, as always. And we'll be speaking to INSEAD professor Tanish Puranam about how we can use all the data that the pandemic has created inside organizations to create better decisions in terms of organizational design. Once again, thanks so much, James. It's been an absolute joy, and happy weekend, everybody.
Thanks.